Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Saturday, which means it's time for a new FL Basics tutorial. This one's going to be about using the Parametric EQ2, the fruity Parametric EQ equalizer 2. I'm going to open up a default one. Boink. Yeah. So, equalizing is a very important part of pretty much any, production type of any kind of music recording of all time. Even if you're not manually doing post correction with EQ, you're still EQing with basic ideas of like microphone placement on some instruments and stuff like that. Various angles will attenuate or accentuate particular frequencies in the audio spectrum, which is basically EQing. So EQing is the primary way in which you make things mix in your mix. And it's still dark in here because I haven't gotten new bulbs yet. I might do that. I might remember to do that at some point. Also, today's Saturday, which means that in like an hour and a half, I'm going to start streaming because I do a live stream every Saturday evening at 6 p.m. EST -5 GMT at justin.tv/SeamlessR. There'll be a link and stuff. But yeah, let's talk about EQing. So, EQing, like how to EQ and why and when you want to EQ are all very important ideas, but they're not basic ones. Some of them are basic, but that's not really what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how to use the fruity Parametric EQ2. You might be wondering why it's called the Parametric EQ2 is because in fact there used to be another parametric equalizer called just the fruity Parametric EQ, which is a bit more classic. Now, a parametric equalizer is called a parametric equalizer because instead of being a graphic EQ, or just like a basic EQ, like a good example of a parametric EQ is actually the built-in one in any of the mixer inserts. This guy here, you have your usual I can go up and down with the band, up and down the other band and whatever. And the parametric part is where you set the parameters for the individual for each band. You set the position of the band, like the frequency, the main frequency of the band, which is what this is here saying, like I want it at 285 hertz, or I want it at 1862 hertz. And then you set the band width, which is how much of the area is being affected when you move the amplitude up or down. That's what a parametric EQ is. A graphic EQ looks kind of like this, only instead of there being 7 bands, there's like 70 bands, and that you don't change the values for each of the bands, you just move it around. And parametric EQ2, it's a parametric EQ, but like this kind of skews what the idea between like a graphic and a parametric EQ in the sense that there's a lot of bands. 7's a pretty big band count. Ableton has the EQ8, I guess, which is similar, but graphic in another sense, in the sense that there's built-in analysis. Now, what analysis is that when you play a sound, oops. When you play a sound, you're receiving visual feedback in some way of the representation of the sound. There's a couple of ways you can do this, but the way that fruity Parametric EQ does it is you get a sort of live spectral view. Oh my god. Yesterday was a weird day for me. I was awake for 30 hours before I finally went to sleep, and that's not an exaggeration. I was literally awake for 30 hours. And the very last thing I did was drive home from Philadelphia, which was like a 3-hour drive, after I went to an AU5 show, which it was a Xylent show that AU5 he opened up, but I had to leave early because I was tired, and I had to drive back 130 miles, probably more than that. I don't know. Anyway, point being, you get a visual representation of the sound. Now, when you think analysis, like an audio analyzer, you might be thinking of a plugin called Voxengo. I don't know how to pronounce it. Span. You probably heard people mention that a lot, and that uses another kind of another visual representation of analysis, where you see like a rising line, rising and falling line kind of thing, and that is pretty much to the same end. Like you're still seeing a representation of the sound. Now, traditional equalizers, like hardware EQs, don't do this sort of thing, and you have to EQ purely by ear. Where you hear a problem, you take a parameter, like a band, and you move the parameters, and then you sweep it around until you find the solution to your problem, and then that's how you EQ. Again, that's not really a basic concept, and how to do that takes more practice and learning, kind of thing. It's an experiential kind of deal, but this greatly helps you because you're given a direct visual feed of where the frequencies are. So this sound that I made because it introduces particular problems that you may not want to have in a sound of this type. Now I'm using it to make high frequency sounds. So you might want to use something like this for a lead or whatever, right? So when a basic idea of EQing is that you like things that are high, like a lead, generally shouldn't have bass frequencies in them because they'll interfere with things that are actually bass related, right? So you notice when I hit a note, it's fine. We get flashes of like low frequency information, but it's not really a big deal. But if I make a chord, suddenly it gets weird. And that's because I'm distorting it, but I still like the sound. I just don't want the low frequencies, so EQ it. Now, if you've ever used Parametric EQ2, the EQ2 in FL, and you've done this, you might be kind of annoyed by the fact that it doesn't cut the sound. In fact, the sound is still mostly audible. And so your first idea is just to do this until it's gone, but then like that's weird looking, right? Now I even actually used to do this until very recently, until like I actually learned how to use this plugin. But the way that this works is that each of these bands are set in specific ways, you know, by default. You have your high pass and your low pass, or high pass, low pass kind of deal already, but they're shelves. In fact, this is a high shelf and this is the low shelf. But the way that you want to make it like a normal cut is if you right click this, you get various options. You get type and order. Now, because Parametric EQ kind of fits in with FL Studio's very like visual kind of aspect, you can get access to those parameters through these things here. So, you know, like I've been like drag this around and that's fine. And then if I scroll while mouse holding over one of these, it'll change the bandwidth, which is kind of neat. Right click and get your options. But what you can do is you can control all these parameters over here. Parametric. That's what that means. So we have our amplitude, we have frequency, we have bandwidth. This is identical to the setup we have here. We have you know, amplitude, frequency, and bandwidth. Only now we have 7 bands. But up here we have these things. We have this little sort of dot going on here, dot system, and then we have these shapes on top. Now these shapes cycle through the filter types, and the dots are the order. So the filter types are in type. So we have disable, where it's just gone. I gotta bring it back through here because it's no longer able to be selected. And peaking is the default setup for these internal tokens. These are called tokens. I guess they're called points, but whatever. These internal points. And then we have various other kinds. We have low pass, high pass, band stop, or notch filter. Low shelf and high shelf. Now I already covered that these are low shelf and high shelf. But say I want this one to be more cut, right? So I make it a high pass. Now when it's high pass, it cuts everything. It's gone. But if I want it to be steeper, I go to order and I'll set a steeper steepness. So 2 is the default. It's the middle of the road. Then we have gentle and we have steep. Steep 8, as you can see, is very steep. And then of course, when you're scrolling and you're moving with the bandwidth is also referred to as the resonance or the Q value. Now, when you're messing with a low pass filter, like in some filter plugin, you have your Q value or your resonance value. This is actually like physically what it's representing. Like the sharpness of the like actually if I were to return this to the low shelf setting and go over here and make this a low pass, I can actually and then the steep, I can actually that's actually a low pass filter. That's just what that is. And direct EQ modulation is actually a fun way to make interesting sounds. Like people are always talking about like Foreman filtering and stuff like that, where you can actually, if you independently automate, that's what these things are here for, by the way, is that you can automate these parameters. If you automate them enough, then they're moving around the correct way, you can make Valel shapes. I am not particularly good at that because I've never tried, but you can Google and find out what frequencies are what formant shapes and how they're built, and then you can experiment with that and make cool things. Like here, I'll if I wanted to, if I made these like really steep kind of thing, now I have a comb filter, and if I were to automate these together to move up and down, it'd be a comb filter kind of thing, and that's cool. So then, yes, this is how you would make a perfect cut as opposed to just a loose cut, which is what the shelf settings normally do. So high pass. So now the sound I have is no longer, you know, a problem in the low end. Yeah, so I just really the important part about dealing with these points is understanding that there are type and order options. It's not, you know, super obvious at first, but then when you get it, that's you know, you have more options available to make things work. And of course, the peaking settings also have that sort of steepness setting, which is nice because you can make really, really very, very fine frequency adjustments. And of course, you notice it's not going all the way because it's a peaking. It's a peaking type. I can go to band stop and have the same setting, and now you see it's like infinity. And now that frequency is gone. So and as you see, that like locating that frequency and getting rid of it was actually very easy because we could see it. We could physically see it. And that sort of stuff is great for when you have to EQ out things like if you recorded a badly tuned snare in a band and there's like just resonant frequencies everywhere. And sometimes having resonant frequencies sounds good, but having too much is bad. So you can actually EQ out resonant frequencies by doing that sort of thing. And you can do that normally with normal, like not visual, like analyzing EQs. You can do it by ear. It's just a little bit harder. So this just is helping you along to make things easy. So let's look at the additional options we have down here. We have this options tabs, which show us various ideas. We have about, and we see who made things and how and whatever, and it was made in 2006. My God, that was a long time ago. We have lock spare state. I'll talk about what spare state is in a second. We have high precision monitor, which basically slows down the analysis so that we can like really quickly grasp onto what's happening. So like by default, that's how stuff goes. If you turn on high precision, it slows down the visual analysis so that you can really, like, if you're using like a really fast sound, like with really sharp transients, and you can't really see what's happening really plainly, high precision monitoring can help you out with that. And then we have a high quality setting which enables and disables oversampling. Then this thing here shows and disables the tokens, what it refers to it as, band tokens. I usually just keep it on like that. It's not really a big deal. And then we have monitoring options. So by default, we have monitor output because you see when you make changes to the EQ, those changes are reflected in the analysis. So this means that like if you make certain parts louder or quieter, the loudness, which is being represented by the brightness and color, the colors will change to reflect your changes. You can also monitor to be just input, whereas the input is always going to be steady, no matter what you do to it. I am personally not okay with that, just because I like to see what the output, like what's actually happening, coming out of it. So I just like that. That's kind of why it's default. I feel like that's what most people would prefer. And then you have just not monitoring at all. And that this is more like a normal EQ. I imagine you want to do that if you're having like CPU issues kind of thing. Because if you have like, 100 of these on every single channel, then it might become a problem. And we have, you showed me use this earlier, where when I made my original example, and it was, I'm all like, no, don't do this, bro, it's bad. and I clicked this button and went back to the default setting, and this is the A/B between spare states. By default, the spare state is always going to be just the default setup already, but I messed with it, and then this was the original state, the one that you were messing with initially, and then I went into the spare state, and then I started messing with the spare state, and so now I have these two states. And what's cool about this, if I were to go to default setup, is that I can make a change. Yay, change! And what would happen if I made some other change? And then I can go to the spare state and then make a different change, and then hold the sound. And then I can see what the difference is immediately. So that's handy. And then locking spare state. See if I already changed the spare state. It means that one of these spare states is always going to be locked. And that can be handy. So I believe I covered everything of massive import with using the parametric EQ2. It's better than the parametric EQ1, although it has similar functionality. If you're ever curious as to what frequency you're messing with, you can see here it actually tells you up here. And if you're just mousing around and you want to see it, it shows up in the information window kind of deal. I think I should probably make a tutorial about this window just so people are familiar with it specifically. And then over here, it also tells you like what octave things are at, C1 to C9. And then we have labels for sections of the audio, low bass, bass, low mid, upper mid, PRS. I'm not totally sure what that means. Treble. And then over here we have the numbers, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 8,000, 10,000, and then presumably 20,000. And then of course we have our dB range. Oh, and this thing changes the entire volume of the whole thing. So like I have actually a particular example where I made an EQ that looks kind of it's like super duper low, and so then like, okay, well I like that, but now I just bring it up, make it louder. It's basically the makeup gain kind of thing. So that's what that's useful for. Yes. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll attempt to answer them. I also like to remind you that I am doing a Patreon campaign, which I have an explanation video for. I'll link in the description to the Patreon page itself, and you can see what's up with that. The short of it is that it's basically Kickstarter, only it's kind of like a subscription, like an ongoing thing. But much like Kickstarter, there's rewards, like cool stuff that I will do for you if you give me money. So check that out, and if you have any questions about that, also let me know. And also, I'll see you at the stream, which will happen soon today. And yeah, have a nice day.